It looks like the device is available, but the Seeing AI project is still not publicly available yet. But it's the Pivot Head smart glasses. They look pretty cool. All right, so we're gonna be building, as I mentioned, a bot that is like a sous chef type of a thing. So this is just an intro to what the bot development experience is like. By no means do I recommend that at the end of today you publish this bot. I definitely don't want to see like 30 versions or however many people are coding tonight. 10 versions of this sous chef bot on Facebook tomorrow or on Skype preview. All right, so we are going to start off in the Azure portal. As I mentioned earlier, it's a new service that combines all of the bot framework, the bot connector service. That's not my machine, is it? No. Okay. You know when things echo really weirdly? That definitely sounded like it was coming out of here. So we're going to use the bot service to build a bot that has this development environment all integrated into Azure. So if you're following along, go to the Azure portal, and we're going to start a new bot service. So that's just in the left blade here. Anyone never used Azure before? Everyone experienced? No? Okay, we got a little mix. Don't be shy to raise your hands. We're all friends.
It's a safe space.
Safe space, yeah. All right, so we're going to create a new bot service. I suppose I should actually show you how to reach that, aside from it being in your recents. If you just search bot service, you'll find it there. And most of the bot framework and cognitive services right now are in preview because they're currently in the limited preview version. They're not general availability yet. But that doesn't mean that you can't use them. So I'm going to create a new app. I'm going to call this, what fun name should I give it? Donald Trump Cinderella? I was going to say, don't tell me that that's already taken by someone else. I'll create a new resource group. Oh, that's there we go. Okay. And if you've never used Azure before, resource groups are a really useful way to compartmentalize your projects. So whenever you start a new project, no matter how many services you create, it's good to keep them in one combined resource group so that at the end of the day, if you're done with your project, if you want to start from scratch or you want to just get rid of all of it, you can have all of those services that were created as part of that project just in one location, so you can bulk delete, you can move all as one. A lot of these services you create spin off a ton of other components, and it can be really confusing. Some of those components will keep racking up charges on their own, and if you've got like tons of things created in one resource group, then you might not be able to find that one that's charging you thousands of dollars. Okay. Happily, we have a Canadian data center that supports the bot service already. We actually have 2 Canadian data centers. We have one in the Toronto area, which is Canada Central, and then we have Montreal, which is Canada East. All right, so I'm just going to go create that, and hopefully the library network doesn't fail me now. Plug in. Okay, so now what it's going to do is it's going to take us through the process of setting up our bot with the bot framework. Before bot service existed, everything was done through the bot framework portal, which is just botframework.com, and this is the landing page that we get. So you can see a view of all the bots that you've got. You can see this is my demo account, so I've got a ton of bot demos. You can register your own bot here, and you can build it this way if you want to build a bot outside of the Azure bot service. So if you want to just clone the SDK yourself, you can do so and register this way without actually touching the bot service. But what we're going to do is go through this process, and if you go create a Microsoft App ID here, it splits you out to that bot framework and has you log in. So If you're following along, please log in with the same account that you used to log into your Azure subscription. Just going to use my Microsoft account. And what it's going to do is, based on the app that you've created, it's going to create an app ID and a password for you to authenticate your user with the bot. So I'll copy this and then bring it back over into these fields. Now, click the button, but please take a screenshot or otherwise save your key. You don't know how many times I have got to this stage, thought it was on the clipboard, closed the window. It never ever exposes this key to you again, ever. So save this key. It's good practice to take a screenshot. Actually, it's really not unless you lock it away, but you know, do what you see fit. So once you do that key process, it validates the keys and it exposes a couple of pre-built templates to you. So you can either build in C# or Node.js, and the templates it gives you are the same. So I'll just walk through what they are, and what we're going to use is the language understanding today. But the basic bot template is if you want to start totally from scratch. It just gives you that one dialogue that echoes back whatever the user has said. A form bot will take you through the process of creating a bot that fills out a whole bunch of information from the user. So in an example of a pizza ordering bot or something that requires the user's information right off the bat, a form bot will take the user through the process of, okay, what's your name? What would you like to order? What would you like on that? Would you like drinks with that? What's your address? What's your credit card information? It'll go through all of that. And you don't need to really do natural language processing for that. It's just filling out a form, so it's very cut and dry. A proactive bot will actually allow you to use Azure functions to trigger different events in Azure bots. So if you want to build something that integrates with other services, with other applications, that's where you'd go for this. That is built without any language understanding templates or form templates built in. So that's really for communicating with other services. The Q&A bot is the simplest bot to build, even simpler than the basic bot template, because what they've built is a guided tool, so you actually can build an FAQ bot with no code at all. So if you go to qnamaker.ai, which I will take you to here, this allows you to copy and paste either the URL to an existing web page of FAQ questions or upload a CSV file of question answer pairs, and it'll just create a bot for you right off the bat. So that's what this Azure Bot Service template does. It'll just take you back out to the Q&A Maker site. And finally, the one that we're going to do today is the language understanding bot. So this uses the cognitive service LUIS, which is the language understanding intelligence service. And what it's going to do here, once I create it, is it's going to kick me out to the LUIS training site, and we're going to build a model of intents and entities to guide the conversation with our bot. So go ahead and select the LUIS model, and then log in with that same account once again. Okay. So now what it's doing, we've hidden the nice little loading icons down here, but you can see it's going to create our bot. It should also have created or be creating in the LUIS.ai portal LUIS application for us to train. So if I go to my apps, I should see, yep, there's an app created on April 19th, 7:30, so that's right here. And it's got this ID, and it's already tied into the bot service that I've created. So by default, the LUIS portal sets you up with one intent. Now the way this whole LUIS language understanding works under this API is you train a model of the different intents that a user would perhaps use the bot for. So in this case, we'll use saying hello, finding a recipe, and defining something. So if they come across a recipe and they don't know what, like, I don't know, I can't come up with a good cooking analogy now, what a meat cleaver is. What the heck is a meat cleaver? Then we'll be able to ask the bot to define a term. So you come up with these intents, and then under those intents, you also have to link it to different entities. So if a person wants to find a recipe for tiramisu, for example, we want to pick out what exactly they want to find a recipe for. That would be the entity. Or if you're booking hotels, you want to say, I need to book a hotel next week in Philadelphia. You want to pull out both entities there, the time frame and the location, and then pull that into the book hotel intent. So everybody go to your lewis.ai portal, and we're going to go start building the intents now. So the first one we can see here is already none. That is just the default. If Lewis doesn't recognize anything, then it'll go spit you into the none intent. And by default, these bots are set up so that it's just a recurring cycle. So if it hits the none intent, it'll listen for the next user input, feed it back to Lewis, and then see again if it can determine what the user wants. So you never get stuck in an end of the path. You're just always reiterating back to the beginning and keeping that conversation open. So I'm going to add an intent here, and I will call this find recipe. Now it's going to kick me into this training part where we add utterances and then define the entities that we would want the bot to pull out. So an utterance is what a user would say to trigger this intent. So let's say I want to make lasagna. What we can do now is train it so that it knows which one of these words is most likely to be the entity that we want to find or operate on. So in this case, it's lasagna. And because we don't have anything set up right now, we're going to create an entity. So I'll just call this dish to be generic and create the entity. So now it's changed it to I want to make dish, so anything that matches this regular expression will trigger this intent. Now, of course, if I trained this model, published it now, the only thing I could say to my bot is I want to make dish, and that's all it would know. So in order to make a good bot, this is where the training comes in. We're going to add a couple of more utterances. So as you're following along, feel free to add, whatever utterances you see fit. You don't even have to really build this exact bot. If you want to go work on some other idea you have, go for it. But I'm going to add, how do I make tiramisu? Use that as the dish, and then find a recipe for X. How else might we trigger this intent?
It has to be, for the user, it has to be correct. The phrase, if you say, I want to make, what if you say, I want to create lasagna? It is covered by the first one or not? You know what I mean?
I don't know. I haven't tried that one myself. Depends on how much you train it. It is active learning, so I don't know. I don't know how it would respond. If someone was to say, I want to create X, what we did with the ViaSport example was, since we exposed all of the unsatisfied inputs to the ViaSport team, they have the ability to go back into Lewis and add those utterances if it's something that they think their users are likely to say. So for a while, there was one particular way of asking a question that our dev team never considered. I think it was, so originally we weren't considering the age range of the people that we wanted to serve. So we had somebody ask, I want to coach 5th grade girls basketball to a new student who has spinal cord bifida. That's a long sentence, right? But it didn't understand the way they phrased the question because we just hadn't encountered anything to do with age range yet. So we were able to go back in, add a new entity, add a new bunch of utterances to reflect that, and then training the model allowed us to capture slightly different ways that people said that.
What about typos, grammar?
Yeah, so typos were something that we hadn't considered when we were planning that bot, but there's a spell check API under the Bing set that we ended up using to double check the user's input before and after anything we really did. So we make a lot of calls to the spell check API. The very first time we do it, is right when we reach the none intent. So if the user says something like, let's say I want to coach hockey, but they spell coach wrong, then what we do is Lewis triggers the none intent because it doesn't understand it, but we send that off to the spell check, and if it comes back with any corrections, then we spit that back to the user, say, did you mean I want to coach hockey? And if they say yes, send that new phrase back to Lewis, and then it'll trigger the new proper intent. Now we also use the spell check API before adding anything to the database, because we found that a lot of people spell basketball wrong, hockey wrong. They'll spell the entity itself incorrectly, and of course if you're searching for basketball in a database and there's 40,000 resources for basketball, you're not going to find anything. But it doesn't mean the resources aren't there. So before we moved anything into the database, before we queried the database, before we stored any entities, we always did a Bing spell check. And then verified with the user. All right. And I'm going to go one more.
What are the ingredients for?
Yes, that's good. Now, if I was to actually build this out, I would create another intent for ingredients, because you might want to find a specific ingredient list rather than like a full recipe.
How about how long do I cook the dish?
How long do I see? That would be another intent as well, because how long do I cook the lasagna is a sub question of how do I make lasagna. It's more targeted. So I would build that out as a separate intent. And
Okay.
if I see the user say, or if the bot sees the user say how long or how much time or anything indicating that time, then it would fit into that intent rather than into just the recipe in general. So I'm happy with the way this is right now. Now what we're going to do is go back into intents and build a hello intent, which is just very simple. What we found with VS Sport was people were saying far more than hello. It was hey, sup, what's up, yo, like all these ways that we talk to people and talk to our friends in messaging apps. People want to talk to bots that way, so we needed to actually go in the dev environment and change, make it respond to yo and sup. Everyone spit out another way. Ciao.
Ni hao.
How do you spell ni hao? Ni hao. That's a new one.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I think we're pretty good there. Did I miss anything?
Hi.
Oh, yeah.
I missed hi. I got ni hao, but not hi. Okay. This is the kind of crowd we have here. All right. So now, if anyone says any one of these greetings, we should say, we should respond appropriately. Now, another intent that I wanted to add was defining. So, what is a meat cleaver was the example I used earlier. And you don't have to go in and do this all right away. You can do them in bulk. So define tiramisu. What the heck does X mean? Then I can go and just change these. And notice here, meat cleaver is 2 words. You can create, you can go ahead and click both of those words and it'll build it as one entity. All right, so now, Now, if we go to intents, we can see our intents here with a certain number of utterances for each of them. Then if we go into entities, we can see we've only got 1 for now, dish. Now that shouldn't be, that's not actually correct. So when I was in there, I made a mistake. I don't want to define dishes. I want to identify an item to define. So if I am to store all of these, for analytics purposes, I don't want them all to be stored as dishes if there's 2 different intents. So luckily Lewis allows us to edit. I'm going to go ahead and add a new entity, call that item to define, and then we're going to leave it as a simple entity. So you can do composite and hierarchical entities as well if you're doing more complex interactions. Okay, Now I'm going to go back into define and change this to item to define. All right, and I'll save that. And now what we can do is go ahead and train the application.
So Sage, on your intent for hello, so if you were building multiple bots, you would have to create that hello intent every time. Is there any way to export them or clone them into different bots?
Yeah, so you can export from the Lewis model right now. You can't pull a single intent out of there. But what you can do is access some of the knowledge base APIs. So there are pre-built word sets, I guess you could say, that will allow you to query that instead of setting up a whole bunch of different ways to respond or ways to say something. So they have those for hellos. They have those for popular cities. So if you're dealing with destinations, you don't have to train it to understand the specific destinations all the time. Now that was built more out of the deprecated Lewis portal, which required you to actually do richer training, so it would understand the difference between saying, I want to go to Japan and I want to go to Italy. Because sometimes it would trigger only if you said, I want to go to Japan, if you hadn't trained it to go to a variety of different countries. So that's why they built these predefined sets. But now with the new portal, you can change, or you can work with the regex, and it's a lot better. Okay, so I'm going to train it. It says it's queued for training, and then we're going to train. Okay, so now it says it's up to date, and we can test it right here. I'm not sure how good it's going to be, considering we only have like 3 utterances for one of them, but let's say ni hao and see what happens. Hello, so it's given us 100% confidence of hello. Now, if I want to say, how do I make tiramisu? We'll see what happens. So it's given us a prediction of us wanting to go into defined recipe intent, and you can see it has a 0.91 confidence in it being that intent. So it is really trying to understand the model. It's not just taking word for word and comparing. You can determine what your confidence ratio is depending on the severity of your application. That's a question I get a lot from bot developers, like how much of the decision should be on the developer to, ensure that the information is accurate. Especially in the case of a bot developer developing on behalf of a company and then, delivering to the users. Is it the company's responsibility to make sure the database has 0 errors? Is it the bot developer's responsibility to make sure that the bot will always go into the right category? Or is it the user's responsibility to, not screw things up by entering grossly incorrect or inappropriate things? There's all kinds of liability and gray area when we deal with conversation and whenever we deal with rogue users, I suppose. There's classic examples of users just abusing bots because they want to find loopholes, they want to train something to respond inappropriately and just be negative. So as you're building, I hear people whispering about certain names that shall not be named. As you're building bots, just be conscious of that and, do an assessment of the severity of what you're doing. If you're doing a recipe bot, unless you're doing it specifically for scenarios where you're dealing with allergies or something that could be dangerous to somebody, your confidence doesn't really have to be that high. You don't really need to be concerned if you loop into the non-intent. But if you're diagnosing illnesses with a bot or you're dealing with mental health applications, which we see a lot of students build, you want to be really sure that you've got a high confidence and you want to do a lot more training, add a lot more utterances, and continue to make sure that your bot or your Lewis model has high confidence across the board. Okay, so now that we've trained it and done a little bit of testing, we can publish the app. Now, what it's going to ask us to do is add a key. This is where we have to go back into Azure. So let's go back into the portal. We can actually do that right here by clicking add a new key to your account. And what it'll ask us to do is buy a key on Azure. It'll pop us out to there. And just like we created the bot service, we can go in and create a cognitive service. What did I call it? Donald Trump Cinderella?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'll call this Donald Trump Cinderella Lewis, because this is specifically going to be the Lewis API. And when I click over here, you can see that, zoom in a little bit there. You can see all the cognitive services APIs listed out. So there's quite a few. Some of them are not in preview anymore. So like the face API is advanced out to general availability. That's where you'll find like emotion detection and all that jazz. We're going to use Lewis. Where are you, Lewis? There it is. And right now, Lewis is only available in West US. Pricing tier, we're just going to go with S0, and then use the existing resource group, which was Donald Trump Cinderella. Okay. So if this is giving you an error right now, you will want to go and enable account creation. It's just so that it can create this subscription or ID for you. I'm going to save that and then pin it to the dashboard and create it. And again, all this is doing is creating the keys for us, much like we did with the bot framework keys. It's just going to build those for us so that we can connect and verify. I'm going to go in this blade, I'm going to go to the keys and then just copy that first one there. And when I go back to Lewis, I can add a new key, call this, oops, add it there, and then call this whatever I wanted my app to be called. I'm going to come back into this like a year from now and be so confused. Either that or the government's already spying. Okay, so now I'll go back to my apps and back into the app that we were creating there. And under publish, I'm going to grab that endpoint key. And now I'll publish it to the production slot so that we automatically send it out to the bot service that we've created. And when I do that, it's successfully published. Okay, so now back to the bot service. In the background, this is what was created. It didn't take that long, I swear to you. It probably took about 45 seconds to do it. This is the, I guess, web-based IDE for building chatbots in the bot service. So on this pane here, we have our development window. You can see the file tree, you can see the log, and a chat interface for you to test the bot. So out of the box, what it has is not very much. It'll say, welcome you. And if I say something else, yo, 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 okay, now it says, sorry, my bot code is having an issue. All right, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. It may be because we went into Lewis and added a bunch of things that it doesn't recognize yet. Or, well, I'm sure we'll find out in a second. Okay, so when we develop bots, we have this development pane. We have a channels pane, which is that bot connector service I mentioned earlier. This allows you to automatically connect out to a bunch of different channels. So it'll take you through a process of getting all of the credentials that you need, getting all of the components you need to configure all of these connections, and it makes it a lot easier than rebuilding the bot or changing the code in any way for each platform. Then under the settings, you can customize the look and feel of your bot. You can configure a continuous integration environment. So if you don't want to develop in this window, which I don't like developing in this window, I always like to connect it out to Visual Studio or just a better environment to develop in. You can do that there. I'm not going to do it today just because it takes a little bit of time to set it up. And then just all the application settings that you might need to get to. So your keys, you never want to expose those keys, so it's all hidden. And this is what makes the bot service so great, because when you're building this from scratch, you have to do a lot more overhead to set up the server. You have to set up all of the hidden files, and it's just not as easy to get going. And then these are the publishing details. So this is how, once you build out your bot, you can go directly to the publish pane and, done and dusted it from there. Okay, back into the development world here. Let me zoom in a bit more. This is why I like the continuous, the integration better, but there we go. Okay, so when the bot launches, we jump into this file, and what we do is we initialize a bot service, we connect to all the services we need to connect to, and then we check to see if it's updating the conversation or if it is receiving a message. And if it's receiving a message, what we do is we initiate this new basic Lewis dialog. So since this is a very basic bot, it only has one dialog right now. And since we're building with C#, all the bot dialogues, it's good practice to have separate CS files for each bot. When you're building in Node.js, you can do it in a much more streamlined way. So this is the same bot that we're building now, but in Node, in Visual Studio Code. And you can see the dialogue, rather than being broken out, it's all just here in one waterfall. But we will go back. Since this is the .NET group, we'll go back to C#. So what this basic Lewis dialog looks like is we retrieve the intent from whatever Lewis tells us it is, and we just go into these separate functions and handle it from there. So as I mentioned, it's automatically set up to continue this loop and to continue to send back to Lewis anytime it doesn't know what the next logical step is. It'll wait for sending the message on to Lewis. And depending on Lewis's response, it'll automatically trigger whatever you've set up here. So in this case, we have two intents set up. There's the none intent and there's my intent. And that's probably why our app broke, because we didn't set up a my intent, right? But if I change this to, what was it? Find recipe. Then maybe it will work. Wow, it's taking a while. Okay. Nope. Let me see if I published it to the right endpoint. It doesn't want to send it out. Close some of these. Maybe this one was set up to staging. Let's see. Okay. No, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go check the one that I built earlier today and see if that one is working. Okay, so this one is successful. I think it was just to do with one of the publication settings. I don't really want to drill down and like compare all the app keys right now, so I'm just going to go off of this spot here and explain how it's structured. So what we do, once again, is if we reach the none intent, we go directly into this and we just spit back to the user. You've reached the none intent, you said whatever they said. If we reach the hello intent, which is set up in exactly the same way that we just built, it'll say you have reached the hello intent, you said whatever. If it reaches the find recipe intent, what we want to do there is go a little bit deeper. So rather than just spit it back to the user, we want to actually be able to understand what the user is saying. Now, the last point that I tested this model, it wasn't recognizing what I was saying because my model is just not trained enough. But I'll show you how to recognize the entities out of whatever Lewis is saying. So what we start by doing, man, that doesn't zoom in very well at all. Can you see that? If it's like this? Yeah? It's okay?
Yes.
All right. So if you are following along, just go ahead and copy this code over. What we do is we've created this new task for this intent specifically, and we're going to create a new variable and wait to get that response from this new function that we're creating. So we're going to pass in the context and the result, and it's really important when you're dealing with bots that you always keep the state passing from task to task. As soon as you lose the state, you lose the entire place in the conversation. So that is very important when you're dealing with these interaction experiences. What we're going to do is tell getEntityAsync what entity that we're looking for. Sometimes it will spit back, Lewis will come back with like 7 entities. Let's say in that example where the person wanted to coach 5th grade girls basketball for a new person with spinal cord bifida, there's like 6 entities in there, right? In this case, we want to be able to say exactly which entity we want and pull that out.
So when it replies webhook was triggered, what does that mean?
Webhook was triggered. Oh, that's
Like
just...
once the function is started.
Yeah, so that's just, I believe, like showing you that it's all set up properly and that it's triggered the webhook to set up the connection. That's not related to Lewis. That's related just to the stuff that's pre-built with the bot service.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So in this case, we're going to look for the dish intent or the dish entity when we go into the find recipe intent, because all we really care about is what do they want to make. So I've created this new task here called getEntityAsync, and it's generic, so it can be used for any different, any intent that you want to use or any specific entity that you want to pull out. So what it does is it creates this entity recommendation item, and then it'll try to parse the list of entity value pairs that Lewis has returned, which is like this complex data structure of all the different things that were combined in the user's utterance. So what we really specifically want to pull out here, while it contains entities, it contains the intent, it contains a whole bunch of information metadata about what the user said, we specifically care about the entities, and in this case the first one, because it's highly unlikely in the bot as we have it today that they're going to use complex sentences or complex utterances. So we pull out that first one, and then we just return that first entity. Now that in itself is a structure as well. So we want to not just take the entity and spit it out, because it'll pull off like the whole sentence and say the post to async, like the whole trail. So all we want to pull out here is dish.entity, and that is off of the object that we just found. So then what we do is we use context.postAsync to spit this back to the user and say, yes, I will find you a recipe for X. So if I say, how do I make tiramisu, it should take us into the find recipe intent. Yes, chef, I will find you a recipe for tiramisu. So there we go. This is the basics of building a bot. From there, what you can do, if I was to build this out further, is I would trigger, what is it? I think it's the Chef API, where you can go through a huge corpus of recipes, of definitions, and make a call out to that to actually go and find the recipe there. Now, when you deal with the bot framework, you can do a lot of really rich interactions. So I'll show you the ViaSport, actually, the ViaSport bot. This is what was created, and I'll say hello, see if it's going to listen to me. I always like to think of these bots that wait for the user to talk first as like shy people on dating apps. Aw, it's not responding. Should change my profile picture. There we go. Okay, so hello, I'm Accessibility Sport Hub. I can assist you in all these ways. So I want to coach wheelchair basketball. So you can see here that it's spat out a whole bunch of different stuff at me. But we call these cards. So when we deliver a card to the user, it's a more structured and more less human way of delivering content to a user. So it'll add richer information, it might add images, and in this particular case, we chose to go this route because we wanted to make sure that we could convey a lot of information in a condensed space. So in this case, it found 2 targeted resources for wheelchair basketball. But some other cases, there's like 20 resources. So do you want it to show up one after another or in a nice list like this, right? These are all bot design decisions, and the exciting thing about the bot world right now is it's still so nascent that we're still coming out with these best practices. So, there's a ton of options for interacting with bots, but each point in the dialogue tree is a decision to make not just on what happens next, but on how you deliver it to the user. So one of the things that we discussed actually at length for the ViaSport project was whether or not to have a prompt like this where a user would click on a button, it'll take you out to the resource, whether we should have a prompt like that for yes or no questions. By default, it does render yes or no prompts as having buttons. But what we decided to do is when we say, did you mean X for a spell check bot, then we want it to have the user respond naturally. So rather than just saying yes or no, they can say, yeah, sure, or whatever way that they want to respond. So if I go back and say, I want to coach hockey, it says, did you mean I want to coach hockey, spelled correctly? And then what I say is yes. And originally what we had were 2 cards with buttons would pop up saying yes or no, and that's how you had to respond. So the point of all this musing about decision making for bots is that all of this is completely invisible to the user. People who are using this bot don't really fully appreciate the length that a developer has to go into to actually make sure it seems like a streamlined and natural experience. So if I say yes here, what it should do is take that back, and at this point it doesn't have anything for coaching hockey.
Sage, is it smart enough if you just put a Y or an N, would it know?
Let's find out. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those cards that are coming up, is that just straight HTML? Is that like something you built in C# backend as a view, or what?
Oh, we didn't build that. It's part of the bot framework.
Oh.
So yeah, the bot framework SDK comes with cards that are structured like that. You can customize the way that they are structured, so what they contain, but by default they have placeholders for images, text, links, and I think up to 2 buttons. Yeah. And then you can have them display in a control like that. You can have them display in a grid, or you can have them one by one pop up a ton of messages. And that was another design decision we made. Cards all in a row, 1 card followed by yes or no prompt of do you want more, or just display all of them, display a few of them. So what we ended up doing is displaying the top 4 results, and if there are more, we'll say, hey, I found 4 of 17 results. Here are the most relevant, but if you would like more, just say yes, and then it'll continue to deliver more results. Okay. So those of you who are following along, did you make it far? Do you want to go back and go through the code and build it out so we have working models of it? No? All good? Okay, so I want to show you then some of the ViaSport code and how we used some of the other APIs in this case. So the Lewis API is unique in that it structures the very essence of a bot. As soon as you use Lewis for dialogue, that is where everything in your bot happens. So it is interwoven completely throughout the entire structure of everything that you're building. But not every API, of course, is like that. So we'll just use a one-off, for example, the spell check API. So if I go to spell check, we actually ended up creating another intent for that. And what I'm going to do, wow, we clearly used it in a lot of places here. Okay, so correct entity spelling. What we do here is, this is called,
Can you make that larger?
oh
please?
yes, oh wow, that's terrible. Come on. Can I make it larger?
Yep.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to correct entity spelling. So this is triggered anytime we're getting new entities from the user. So whenever we do that check and see if we can pull out entities, as I mentioned before, we don't want to put anything that's spelled incorrectly into the database or store anything even in the current session that's not something that'll be useful. So automatically what we do is we go and make a call to the spell check API to get any potential spelling errors there. So what we do is we create this, this collection. Where are we? Hang on a second. This is actually called, okay. Here we go. I'm looking for where it calls out to the spelling API. Let me see. Okay, so this is the actual spell check call here. So once we're in the check entity spelling, it makes a call to this spell check, which will create the call and send it out, and then bring in the response so that we can actually parse it and determine where in the sentences these spelling errors might occur. So it'll return an object that has all of this in it. Now, what the the Bing spell check API returns includes the offset, so the position in the phrase of any misspelled words, the token, so what the wrong word was, and then the suggestion itself. So we're gonna go through and find, parsing out that JSON file, we're gonna find all of that and build it into this structure, and then return that. Now, what we do with that is we then go through and we pull out specifically the suggested correction at that specific place in the sentence. So we go through the sentence, and if there is a spelling error at that point, then we replace the word with its correction. So this again took a lot of design decision time. We wanted to determine, what is the best way to convey that the user has spelled something incorrectly. So we weren't sure if we should spit the whole thing back to the user or spit back just the one word that was spelled wrong. But then someone put something in that was like all entirely spelled wrong, and we're like, oh, that completely breaks our bot. So we had to spit the entire thing back. And so this is how we build that sentence. For all of the old words, we want to replace that with the new word, and then we return that phrase back and spit that back to the user. So that's how the spell check API is implemented. The web search API, oops. If I can find it, it's on web search. There we are. Okay, so the web search API builds a query that we want to send out to Bing based on the entities that the user's already stored. So this is different from the spell check API in that with the spell check, we directly have a single phrase already that we want to check. So that was easy. We just sent that directly to the API. But with the web search, you want to kind of target it so that you're getting the most relevant results, right? You don't want it to be whatever the user's initial query was, because then you will get results for, I want to coach wheelchair basketball for girls with blah, 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 blah. And then you end up going right back to square one, which is not giving the user a good experience. So what we did here was we would pull out specifically the entities that we stored, and we also give the user a chance through other tasks here to fill in any information that's missing. So there is a protocol here that if there are certain things missing, we'll actually prompt the user to say, hey, I don't see disability here. What are you specifically looking for? And then they'll put in one or more, and from there, that's what we'll take and build in. So what we do is we will actually use the intent. So that's the name of the intent that, or that's based on the intent that Lewis has triggered. And we'll build that into the query alongside the sports, the subject, which is potentially like girls aged 5 to 17, whatever they may have put in, adults, whatever it might be, and then the disability type. And those default to whatever the intent is. If they skip all of the questions where we prompt them to fill in more information, we don't want it to be just a generic coaching search, right? That's super useless. So what we do then is just default to sports people with disabilities. So if somebody says, I want to coach, and then skips all of the targeted questions, instead of saying, I want to coach to Bing, we say coaching sports people with disabilities, and it comes up with at least a narrowed result. So that's the Bing API in use. And I can't show you this next piece that I'm going to talk about right now, but I guess I'll close with this. The final thing that we built into the VS Sport bot was the ability to positively influence the conversation around athletes with disabilities. So in many cases, people might be using an incorrect term or an outdated or offensive term to refer to a disability, particularly if they're learning to coach or teach somebody with this disability. Now, we absolutely do not want to store that in the database. That was made clear from day one. You know, if somebody uses an offensive slur, we don't want to continue to use that in the bot. And this comes back to that responsibility piece again. Whose responsibility is it? The user to not be, you know, a jerk, or the developer to make sure that if they are doing that, we can't, you know, continue to further that prejudice. So what we did was we actually created a list of the negative words and their corrected terms, and we vetted that with a bunch of people in the community and built it so that if we trigger one of those negative terms, we'll actually replace it in all of the bot's further conversations with the corrected one. So this was VS Sport's decision to be super subtle about it. We didn't want to start preaching. You know, we didn't want it to be, that's incorrect, that's you know, not something you should say, because that takes away from the user experience. And there is a subset of people who, you know, may have used the negative term and had no idea that it was incorrect. So rather than chastise them, what we do is say, if they use X negative term, then we'll replace it with the correct one in the database, in the searches, in all the results, just automatically and subtly. Again, I can't show you the implementation of that yet, but come back in May and I will. I guess I'll open it up to questions because we're at like 8:15. Happy to discuss any of this.
So this VS Sport project is an open source then?
Not right now.
So would you have a recommendation on a good project to follow if you want to build a chatbot?
I would look to. Do you know if they're still open sourcing Missing Children as we move forward with that?
I don't know. I think it should still be available.
Yeah, so that's another project that our team worked on, is a project for the Missing Children Society. It doesn't actually, it didn't have a bot right away exposed to the user, but they're looking at building one in now. And what that does is, in many cases when a child goes missing, it's not an abduction or like a, you know, one of those crazy high profile stories that we see about. It's a much more conditioned and subtle approach, and in many cases the person who has brought a child away or lured a child away has actually interacted with them on social media. So Missing Children Society identified that this is a niche problem here that nobody's addressing. So they came to Microsoft and built an application to, once a user has signed up with it or a parent has signed up for the child, if they go missing, we can actually have access to their social media information and data and help track them down. using machine learning, using bots working in the background actually, and expose that information to the police and the community in protected ways so that we can help crowdsource tracking them down. Yeah,
So it's on GitHub, cdn-missing-children-hack.
nice.
If they look it up and everything that you guys put on
Awesome.
is there.
Can you put that in the meetup link?
Yeah.
Cool. So it's there. Follow that project. That's a really awesome one. It's open and it's continuing to grow.
So once you've narrowed down, like you said, you have the custom cards for stuff that was in your database. How do you get that out? Is it like just like a custom web service that's going to your database once you've pulled enough information from the user? And then
In which?
So, like for example, when you asked about wheelchair basketball, you had the custom cards because there was some predefined
Right.
entries that they had entered into their system.
So we actually deliver the web search back as cards as well. So anything that we have rich information for, we'll deliver back as a card, and that's all just done in formatting in the code. There's no like special job for
But
formatting
that
way.
particular data was stuff that had been entered by
In the database,
the
right?
association, right? So like, how are you pulling that out of the database? Does this have a direct link to the database? Is it
Yeah.
going-
Yeah, it's directly, it's linked in, and I've been told not to talk too much about the way we actually interact with the database, so, it's directly querying the database and then pulling out that information and then just spitting it out to the
Okay.
cards. Yeah. Cool. All right, awesome. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, wants to build a bot, or wants to like specifically, if you run into anything, feel free to tweet me anytime. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sage. All right, we'll do our swag draw now. Does everyone have a red ticket?